Come with me to a magical place where being labeled the pork queen is a compliment, where being nice is just a way of life, and where all leaders of the free world must pass through. Welcome to Iowa. Whether you're a current Iowan, an Iowa expat, or an Iowan at heart, this show is for you. This is the Iowa Podcast. Real Iowans, real talk, no drama. I'm Justin Brady, and according to Axios, this decline in Christianity across the country has actually plateaued just a little bit. Actually plateaued, but not before it actually came crashing down for many, many years. We're going to talk about all that. We're going to talk about why, and why Iowa actually meets the national trend. Iowa kind of bucks the trend a lot, you all know that, but Iowa in this case is following the trend. We're going to figure out why that is with Pastor Rob Pearson, the Youth and Connections pastor. And you know what? I can't believe I did this. Name your church, because I didn't even write it down.
Okay, Living Waters Fellowship, right?
Living Waters Fellowship.
Southside of Des Moines.
Mistake, everybody. All right, Living Waters Fellowship. I want to get that right. There we go. Okay, so a lot of people aren't identifying as Christian anymore. Now, there are a lot of questions I have, and I know the listeners have around this topic. But in 2007, it was 78% of the country that claimed to be a Christian. I say claimed, maybe we'll get into that. In 2024, it's 63%. So however you read the data, this is all from Pew Research, everybody. A link will go in the show notes so you can look at it yourself. And Iowa looks to be tracking with that trend. So it's a, a downward trend. Ooh. Can I start broadly and say what happened? And also, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me on. This should be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. Broadly, why? I think we probably have to start with defining terms, like what is a church, what was being researched, those kind of things. When you think of what kind of churches are out there, mainline denominations. There have been a lot of, it seems like, dying churches, throughout Iowa. And so you're seeing that. But on the other side, the network that I'm involved in, we're seeing growth, and we're planting churches, and we're seeing people enjoy that. So there is. I think there's some reasons behind that, maybe why those mainline denominations, people have kind of fled from that. So we can certainly talk about that. I think to start with, I would say that people have expectations, when they come to a church, and as people change, in society and in the world, people have expectations when they walk into a church.
That's interesting.
And we have. There's church shopping, but where people are looking for, trying to figure out like what they want, instead of going, okay, what church is probably the most biblical, or what, and letting the word inform your life, that sort of situation.
So there are a few terms here, because I asked about Christians, and you also mentioned churches. Now, according to the data, those things are actually distinct now. I think historically they may have been probably tracking, like if 78% of the country identifies as a Christian, 78% attends church.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it's super interesting because, and by the way, Pew Research data does get this granular, and it is all over the map, to your point. Like it's kind of weird, but you mentioned in your church planting network, you're seeing growth, but nationally and in Iowa, people identifying as Christians are down, and people going to church are also down. And so we're going to dig into a lot. I mean, it sounds really confusing. People are like, how can Christians be down? But Pastor Pearson's saying that their denominations are going up. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It will. That's what the whole point of this is. You mentioned expectations. I'm actually glad you said this, because you kind of imply, correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of imply people are going to or looking for churches almost as if they would look for groceries.
Right.
Like, this one has the, I don't know, this one has the cream top on the muffin, and this one doesn't have the, like, is this kind of what people are doing?
A little bit. I think there is some of that. I think people have things going on in their lives, and they're looking for an answer for the things that are going on in their lives.
Sure.
And then they want maybe everything to line up with what their current view is on life. And so then they walk into the church and they look for a church that already matches what they have going on in their head, kind of.
Sure.
But I think when you think of Christians, and you look at the word Christian in and of itself, there's a lot of people that I'll talk to out on the street I'll say, well, what does that mean to you? What does it mean to you that you're a Christian? And you get definitions that are pretty wide and or loose on what a Christian is. I would say a Christian is somebody that has decided that Jesus is God and Jesus is who they're going to follow, and so that to me is a Christian. So whereas like you might talk to some Muslims and they would say, well, okay, well, you're in America, so you're a Christian.
Wow.
So like I think we really have to. It's fun to get into those conversations with people and say, well, what is it you actually believe? Yeah.
Like for example, the U.S. is a Christian nation. That's what you hear thrown around a lot. Mm-hmm. And then people are like, if the U.S. is a Christian nation, why did you do X, Y, Z? Name your awful thing. And then you're like, okay, hold up. The U.S. is not a Christian nation. We had some Christians that started it, but so that's kind of that's thrown around a lot globally. Is that you're just an American and you're a Christian, which is certainly not the case. So, are we seeing a real decline then in Christianity? Because 78% in 2007. Like that's what the data says. 78% of the USA identified as a Christian in 2007, which to me, I'm like, there's just no way. Yeah. That just seems artificially high. Is that behind it? Is it because maybe I should ask this as a question. Is Christianity declining, those who follow Jesus, is that declining, or are people just starting to finally realize what being a Christian is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think maybe people that jumped on board, became Christians, went to a church, did the religious thing, it has become less convenient to do that. Whereas it was more convenient in America before to just call yourself Christian, go to a church, be part of this community. Now it's getting harder. It pushes people the way that society is going. It pushes people to go, what do I really believe, and do I really believe that Jesus is the Savior of the world and that I want to follow him and that means things for my life?
Do you think that like 60s, 70s, before my time clearly, but do you think like the 60s, 70s Christian movement, there was a little bit of public pressure? Like you kind of indicated a little bit of that there, so I want to explore that. But was there a little bit of public pressure? Like you just kind of had to say you were a Christian to keep people off your back and shut up and fine, I'm a Christian. Was there a little bit of that in that culture, and that finally that public pressure is releasing?
Maybe. I guess I don't know.
I don't know.
It could be. I look at like my family history, and I'll just talk a little bit about that. Like, my dad did not come from any Christian home and lived out in the country, and then it was when he got into his 20s that he heard about Jesus and gave his life to Jesus. So like, I don't think that's, I don't think that's everybody's story probably.
Yeah.
But it wasn't unpopular to be a Christian, I don't think, if you go back in history in the U.S. Whereas I think now, like, it can become less popular.
Because one of the other things I wanted to get into with you was that where just national numbers, Christianity is declining. We are seeing increases, not by a lot, but a little bit, in Islam, Judaism, Buddhism. And so if people are taking the mentality of like religion shopping, which I agree with, that you probably shouldn't focus on religions from an aspect of what you want. It should probably be what's the truth.
Yep.
But if people are religious shopping, why are they pulling Islam, Judaism, and Buddhism off the shelf instead of Christianity?
That's a great question. I think, I think you go to the deepest issue of all of this, which you go back in time to Genesis, right? And so you say, hey, everything's perfect in the garden. Adam and Eve sin. They're kicked out of the garden for their sin. They're in a fallen world. We're in the flesh. We're sinful in the flesh now. there's a war between good and evil, between God and Satan, and so that war is against Jesus Christ, and so that is very real, and so that is being fought, and so people that I've talked to, we're finding more religious plurality with people as well.
So this is interesting because when you say, now for those that don't know, full disclosure here, everybody, I actually have a Bible major.
Hey, all right.
So
maybe I should be asking you the questions here.
Rob's in the hot seat, let me tell you. What's interesting is, as a Christian, like I was telling you before we were recording, I try to do my best to look at any issue from complete neutrality. Mm-hmm. There may be a better word to say this, but I try to take my own Christian background, my own education, my own upbringing completely out of any issue before I tackle it. Mm-hmm. That's what I try to do. Yeah. And I always think of the whole like God versus Satan thing and supernatural stuff. From a non-believer, from a non-Christian, sounds a bit wacky. Now, from someone who is like Islam or Judaism, right? That's an easier conversation to have. They have a foundation in the supernatural. Yeah. So I've always kind of thought I know that sounds crazy to people when I talk about that. I know it sounds nuts, but according to Pew Research, maybe it's not that nuts. Yeah. Because 80%, this is roughly, I'm combining two different data sets here, 80% believe in the supernatural and the existence, now they don't say what that is, obviously, and the existence of their own soul that's different from their body. 80%, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. So is there just a disconnect? Like people know there's this deeper, like they know there's a supernatural and they're just looking to kind of find where that fits. Is this kind of what's going on?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's definitely the problem. When Paul speaks to Mars Hill, he said perhaps that they would feel their way to God, and the people they were looking for an unknown God, and Paul's like, perhaps you might feel your way to God. Well, people are there. Since you go back to Paul as he's preaching there, people are trying to feel their way to God. Like, who is God? Where is God? And so a lot of people will have these ideas that, your God is okay. Your God is okay. All these gods, it leads up to this mountain, and there's some sort of deity at the top. Just believe in one of them, it's fine. And but Jesus Christ, is obviously exclusive. He says that he's the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except through the Son, Jesus. And so, getting to a spot in conversation first with people, and these are long, they're fun conversations to have with people as they're wrestling through, like, first, is there a God? And working through all the questions, it's hard to deny that there's a God when you start to look at the stars and the moon and everything else, and, just how things are made, how the body's made, all of those things, that there's not a designer behind that, right? But you go beyond that, and then you get to, okay, well, if there's a God, who is God? And wouldn't God have left us something? If he's designed all of this, wouldn't he have left us something to be able to talk to us? Well, and that's why I believe the Word of God is, and the Bible, and he tells the story from the beginning to the end, and the good news of Jesus. So
I will say, like, there is this clear break. Right? There are people that are seeking this truth and seeking out religions, but then there's also, at the same time, a growing number of atheists in the world. And that number, by the way, has also plateaued. So we're at almost this, like, we're at this odd, like, is something changing in this country? And this is all U.S. data I'm sourcing. And so atheism was also growing and has leveled off at 29%. So are we seeing this plurality, this split, where some people are looking for religions for truth, and then others are kind of saying, like, I don't even know what the truth is? Because sometimes I talk to atheists, and it turns out they're not atheists. Yep. They're actually agnostics. Yes. And they just think atheism means, well, I don't know what the truth is, so I'm not going to tell you. I'm like, well, dude, that's agnostic. Yeah. Different. Totally fine. Yeah. And so are we actually seeing, is the data of atheism increasing and people looking for various religions? Are they both a sign that finally people are starting to look for things? Like, is the data just becoming actually more clear? Whereas before it was a little cloudy. People are like, I don't know, I believe in God, so I'm a Christian, I guess. You know,
right? Yeah.
Are things just becoming more clear? People are seeking.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think if you look back, I would probably say that with all of these churches, and you had so much religiosity where people were trying to like, hey, do a bunch of things. You go to church, you check the box, but there's no real change of heart. There's no real change of life. They're not finding they're not finding God maybe in the church wherever they were at, and so now they're going, okay, maybe atheism is the answer. But with young people today, you know, we're seeing more questions. Like kids are searching for truth, and I think kids today are better than even when I was growing up, where they're better at asking questions and they want to get to truth, and so it's really cool.
What are some of the questions that are coming up now? Is there any? You work with youth a lot, clearly, and are there any kind of pattern questions that seem to come up a lot that people are asking?
Well, I would say there's probably a couple categories. There's your kids that are already in the church. Maybe they've grown up in a home that's taught them about Jesus, and so their questions might be more Bible knowledge based. Some life questions based, like how does this work itself out in my life? You know, as I follow Jesus. But then we've got kids that'll come to youth group that just don't. You know, they've really never heard much of the Bible. They've really never heard much about Jesus Christ. And so their questions are like, okay, well, who is Jesus? What did he do? Like,
so it's
why?
that broad.
Yeah, it's super broad. It's super broad, which is awesome because I love it getting into just no basis of knowledge for who Jesus is to, okay, now you're coming to know the God of the Bible who loves you, who died for you. And it's cool to see that go off in their minds.
Is that part of the downward trend in people identifying as Christians? Because, and it's really interesting, Rob, because what you're saying, again, aligns with the Pew Research data. Younger folks are less likely to identify as a Christian than those like 75 plus, I think is what the comparison data was. But, and this is the key thing, and you're indicating this as well, they're also less likely to grow up in a home that identifies as Christian or a religious household, I believe is what Pew Research phrases it as. So to your point, a lot of younger people aren't Christian, but they're also not growing up in a Christian home at all, which is interesting because those 75 and older was like 85% or something really, really high. So it's like some of these older people who grew up in Christian homes and claim to be a Christian aren't actually teaching their children this, which explains why there's a disparity in the younger population. And so are the questions from kids very much coming from a standpoint and a foundation of, I have no foundation in any of this stuff?
Yes, that's totally what it is. They don't have a foundation in any of it, and they're looking for truth. They're looking for the answers for life. And it's cool with kids because they're not walking in with any prior church hurt. That's
a good point.
You know, and they're walking in and saying like, I just want to know the truth. I want to know, like, is God real? Is Jesus real? Who is he? And then like the fun questions, like there's always these questions like, hey, does the Bible talk about dinosaurs? You know, like those, they come up, you know? Yeah. And so we go through those questions and it's a fun time.
And the answer is yes.
Yes.
They do.
Yes, it does.
So talking about the church, 63%, again, going back to the numbers presently, 63% consider themselves a Christian, 30% belong to a traditional church. And I think Pew defines this as like a building where everybody goes and worships together. So are we seeing if 63% consider themselves a Christian, 30% belong to a traditional church, are people just not going to the church at all, or people changing their definition of what church is? You're obviously seeing some growth, but you know, Acts defines the church as, I think it's 3 or more gather. There I will be. I can't quote the exact verse, but church is people gathering together. There's accountability there. There's community there. So are people just changing the definition of church? Some similar to the fact that they're finally learning what Christian actually means, or not. In your case, it sounds like no, they're still coming to like a traditional church.
Yeah, they're still coming, or we're finding them. Like we're called to as believers to pray to the Lord of the harvest, like to find people, and that there's so many. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. So there's so many people out there that desire to know Christ and that don't. And so, yeah, we'll go out from the church to find, those people. But I think what you're mentioning, yeah, where two or three are gathered, there I am. Yes, God is there, but it's God's idea is the church, right? And so what's the purpose of the church? And we have people that come in and we do membership classes, and they're like, okay, what's with membership? The Bible doesn't really use the word membership,
It's true, yeah.
And so we go through membership classes. Why members? Why do those things? And so we work through all of that and to try to explain, like, what is the purpose of the church? Jesus, when he's talking to Peter, he says, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so God uses the church to fight this unseen battle that is going on, that's being waged.
There's a term there, the church and a church, right? And so I find that, and I don't know if this is a turnoff or it matters, but sometimes Christians tend to talk in what I call Christianese.
Yes. Yep.
And so it's like, they'll talk about the blood of Christ, and people are like, what the heck are you talking about? It sounds disgusting. What is wrong with you people?
Yes.
So we do, Christians tend to do that a lot.
Yeah.
And so when you say the church and a church, those are actually two, I mean, they're not two different things, but they kind of are. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so there's the church, there's the people that that through Jesus Christ, people are coming to know Jesus Christ, who died for their sin, who paid for their sin, and they're putting their trust in him by faith. And so those people, God saves. When somebody puts their trust in Jesus as their Savior, God saves them. They become part of his church, the big church, right? And then there's the local church. The local church would be like, these little churches, like gatherings of a body of believers in different places, and then trying to do the things that God calls you to do in the church. So like the sacraments, baptism and communion, and those things as you gather together. And then in the church, the local church, that is where a lot of we're told, like, hey, love one another. Like a lot of things in 1 John talk about what we're supposed to do in the church, and so things that are to be carried out. Now, it doesn't really talk about size, right? Like, could be small, could be big. There's not, I think when Jesus, I don't remember the number, it was like 100 and something. Right before, in the upper room before Jesus is crucified, like it was like 100 and some people that were there. So it wasn't, a massive gathering, but that's what it was. And but you have the size of the church. I don't know that that's as big of a deal as much as is a church doing what a church should be doing?
Yeah, and there is like an some outlining structure with how to structure a church, and how do you elders and deacons and how they're organized. There are some instructions to that which indicate that a church body, a church community, maybe should have at least enough structure to run it.
Yes.
Whether it has a building or not. I think a lot of Christians get stuck on the building. Yeah. And they're like, well, we need to have a building. No, you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. But have online services, because speaking of the building, I know this is kind of a contentious point.
Okay. Yeah. This is
there's conflict in the church, just like, and that's okay. Conflict's good.
Yep.
But I know that there's like this little bit of conflict with like the online church, which got popularized in 2020 COVID.
Yes.
So there's this one idea that increases access. So that's good. More people can hear the gospel message. Okay. But then there's also this, but at the same time, it allows people to kind of unplug from the community a little bit, which is also a difficult thing. So where do you sit on that?
Yeah.
And like, what do pastors think?
Yeah.
What do congregants think? What's the kind of the thinking here?
So we encourage our church, to get together. In Hebrews, you would see where it says, "Do not forsake the gathering of yourselves." So like we're supposed to gather together. Well, I think that was the thing during COVID that we were like, you felt it. Like you felt, I'm not gathered with people. Like this is so weird. I love that I can sit across a table from you and have a conversation right now.
Absolutely.
Like if we're doing it over a screen, like it's just not the same. And
Jesus couldn't have fed the 5,000 over the screen.
Oh,
right? He would have had to FedEx the loaves and fishes.
Right. Yeah, Amazon it over or whatever. Yeah, and so there is definitely something to gathering together. Like,
good point.
I'm the connections pastor. So when people come in on a Sunday morning, like. I get to hug people, like you don't get to do that over a screen, and so like that's part of a community in a church is loving one another. And I think it's loving to someone else to be there. And you need it too, like to be in a church and to be loved on by others.
Yeah, it's interesting because the raging debate in like remote work and in-person work almost comes into the church too, because, and I take both sides on this, which is the flexibility for remote is great.
Yes.
And I like, I work for myself, therefore I set the rules. Therefore, I don't really have, but what's funny about that is I still actually pay monthly.
Yeah.
For an office membership to go to an office and work with other people.
Yes.
Which is funny, And so some people, it must be nice to work from home and work. Yeah, but I pay money of my own money to go to work. And they're like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
So there is this like a split where I think I think remote is great, but in person is so powerful. There's a tech CEO that was on this show years ago. I think years ago by now. The show's actually getting old, everybody. And he mentioned tech CEO, they're deep into AI. So you'd think tech CEO, AI, they probably do like Meta goggle meetings and this stuff. Not true. He actually gives all his employees thousands of dollars annual in a budget to meet together. And he calls meeting together high bandwidth communication. Because you can communicate with your eyes. Like you said, you can give someone a hug, a high five. Yeah. We don't, I think previously we've discounted how impactful that is because we didn't have the ability to track it and understand it and research it. We do now. We can track human connection through fMRI machines, and we can realize that, yes, the majority of human communication is coming from the nonverbals, which is why when you text someone, people get so angry so quickly because you're like, hey, what the? I was like, this is a good faith conversation. Now they're ticked off, Yeah. It's because that high bandwidth communication really does matter.
Yeah.
So is this something that you're pushing people to do then is to come back in person, come back. If you want to, I don't even know if you do online services. Do you do?
We do have some. Yep.
So you do say, hey, online services is good for when you're sick or but you should, seek a community. Is that a hard pill for some people to swallow?
I don't think so. Maybe right after COVID, it was like those were conversations we were having with people and explaining to people the importance of, hey, coming back out of the home. And you also had just fear going on at that time too with people coming back after COVID. But now I think it's a matter of like people love, gathering together. And so it's not a hard sell, I guess, if you were to try to say you were selling it. People just enjoy, I think, being connected, being around other people. And then like, when you're singing, like you're called to corporately sing, right? Like, we sing together. Well, when you're singing next to me, it's encouraging to me. If your
tone is right, it is.
It doesn't even have to be
just
that.
Kidding. Just kidding.
We're supposed to make a joyful noise, right? And
there's some people who their noise just is not that joyful.
That's true.
Totally a joke. I'm not judging anybody. That's right.
But it is great to be singing next to other people, and it's encouraging. When you're at home, you just don't get that, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But there is value in technology. People are sick, they're on vacation, they want to plug in. Or, hey, we do a podcast for the church. Our slogan is like, hey, we try to help the church feel smaller, keep people connected. So as the church continues to grow in number, sometimes it's hard to know like a person over here or know a person over there. And then I bring them on the podcast and, hey, talk about your life. And then now you're able to connect with that person when you see them on a Sunday morning. So
absolutely. You talk to a lot of young people, and so probably this will be the final note, but are there a lot of turnoffs? Because I know that when I speak to people about the church or about Christians in general, just in my discussions, actually, maybe there are two questions, but are there any turnoffs that often come up in individuals, younger people are like, well, you Christians believe this, that's disgusting to me, and I could never be a Christian for that reason. Are there any turnoffs that you get a lot that you're like, we don't believe that at all? Like, that's not even remotely what we believe.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I met with a girl not too long ago in a group, and she's like, my dad says that, I don't remember how she worded it, but it was about sexuality, and it was like, hey, I'm bisexual, and I was bisexual, and he said, because I did that, I'm going to hell.
Wow.
Is that true? Is that what the Bible says? And so it was really cool because I said, let's put a pin in that. And then we worked through the gospel, which the gospel says we're all sinners, and that includes me, right? I'm a messed up sinner, but Jesus came and died for me. And if I put my trust in him, it's as if I never sinned. He wiped away, all my sin. And so I can stand before God because of Jesus. I can stand before God righteous someday. And so after we worked through that, and I said, okay, so let's go back to what your dad says. Is that true? She's like, well, if I put my faith in Jesus, then no. I'm like, you're absolutely right.
There is a sense, I do think, and it's sad, but just like any other religion, any other organized group, any other community, I do think there is a strong sense, correct me if I'm wrong, and some people who identify as Christians that have this almost Christian elitism, where they're like, in order to choose to follow Jesus, your life has to look like this, and this, otherwise you're not in the club. I do see that. I don't know if you see that, but do you see that as well? Yeah,
well, I think that's kind of what Jesus was teaching against when he was talking to the Pharisees, where the Pharisees were like, you clean up the outside, but inside you're horrible, right?
Yeah.
And like you're doing all these things on the outside. Well,
and this was Jesus talking to the religious leaders of the day.
Yes.
Saying, you guys are the judgy ones. You're being horrible. You have all these hoops you're asking people to jump through that I never instructed anybody to jump through.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he says that to them, and then he's who comes to us in our sin, right? He doesn't come to us and say, clean up your life, and then and then I'll save you. Like, we would all be screwed if that was the case, right? Like, and so no, it's he comes into our lives and he starts changing us from the inside out. My favorite verse in the whole Bible is Philippians 1:6. He who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Jesus Christ. So once Jesus starts his work in somebody, he continues working, and the Holy Spirit comes and lives inside of them and works against the sin nature. And then there's this internal war that goes on inside, and you're fighting against, your flesh and your sin. And so, like, does a Christian's life look perfect? No, absolutely not. I am in progress this side of heaven. And I think that's an important thing for anybody walking into a church, because sometimes you can walk into a church and say, well, hey, the church is saying to follow Jesus, and that means to obey him and do some things. It does mean to, like, do some things, right? Well, that's hypocrisy, because I'm seeing this guy doing this. Well, yeah, they're sinners too, so the church is filled with sinners that are being changed by Jesus.
Yeah. Following Jesus, being a Christian, is not a certain point in time. Yeah. It's not specific criteria. It's a trajectory. And that's what I think I hear you saying. And I think a lot of people think that, X, Y, and Z need to be done before I be a Christian. And what you're saying is that's not actually what Christianity is. Yeah. It looks like, according to the Pew data, that's what people thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so everybody is like, well, I grew up in a Christian house. My dad went to church. I guess I'm a Christian. It's like, that's not it at all.
Yeah.
And so maybe this data is an opportunity for Christians. Maybe this is opportunity for the church. You guys see how I use those interchangeably?
Hey.
Gonna blow some minds out there. Rob Pearson, the Youth and Connections Pastor at Living Waters Fellowship here in Des Moines, I believe.
Yes, Southside.
What's the podcast on the website if people want to reach out and follow up on anything you said?
It's Living Waters Fellowship. You can find it on Spotify or Apple, and just look up Living Waters Fellowship.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's all you got to do.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
Rob, thank you so much for coming on the Iowa podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
And to my fellow Iowans, Iowa expats, and Iowans at heart, thanks for listening and subscribing to the Iowa podcast.